In this morning's lesson, we're introduced to this cast of familiar characters, disciples who don't have a lick of sense. There are also Pharisees. They're not really present, but their strong arm is felt by the disciples who worry for Jesus' safety. And then we have this presence of an ambiguous crowd who are going to unwittingly be witnesses to the miracle of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. But this narrative is very different from previous narratives in John. This is a very intimate but public display surrounding the death of Jesus' dear friend Lazarus and his two spinster sisters, Mary and Martha. We see that the four are very close. Close enough that Mary and Martha know how to find Jesus for a family emergency while he's not even in Judea. Up until this pericope, John has been presenting his audience with these vignettes which dance around this idea of Jesus' true nature in the following manner. First, Rabbi Jesus performs some sign or wonder, and then people come to identify him as a prophet. Some recognize him as a man with supernatural powers, and a few, like the woman at the well, begin believing Jesus is the Messiah. But here in Bethany, the three siblings believe Jesus is all those things and probably more. So when Lazarus becomes very ill, his devoted sisters send word to Jesus that his presence is needed right away. But Jesus seems to misunderstand the seriousness of the situation and continues working some 30 miles away in the valley of the Jordan River. Was Jesus wrong? Because Lazarus dies, and according to Jewish law, he must be buried within 24 hours. So the married women of the village cleanse his body with myrrh and olive oil, and then they bind his body with burial gauze. And the men solemnly carry him into the tomb, carved into the hillside, and they push a large stone across the front of the tomb. Does this sound familiar? Yet in Lazarus' case, he is truly dead, and his body begins to decompose, as Martha so brilliantly puts it. And in the meantime, the day after Lazarus' burial, Jesus gets the message and tells his disciples, it's time to go to Bethany to wake up my friend. Truthfully, these disciples leave a little bit to be desired sometimes. So when Jesus said, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, yet I'm going to wake him up, they incorrectly assume a very little translation of this. Not correct, right? And so I can kind of imagine Jesus' response being more along the lines of like, seriously, guys, really? Really? No, he's really dead. He's really, truly dead. And I mean so really, really dead. And yes, by the time we write, it will be several days after his death that I'm going to that tomb, and I will stare death right in the face. Now, who's coming with me? Well, none of them are too keen about taking this trip. And frankly, it's not been that long ago in Judea that a very angry mob had tried to stone Jesus. So convinced is Thomas that more trouble will be there waiting for them that he actually says, well then, let's go, so that we might die with him. I love Thomas. Without another word, Jesus starts on that journey to Bethany. And he tells them that it is for their sake that they are doing this. They need to be witnesses to this miracle that's about to occur. It's going to be different from all the rest. They must also understand that they need not be afraid in the darkest shadows of death and evil. More importantly, Jesus takes them on this journey that they might believe he is not only the anointed one who has come to redeem Israel, and that is what all Jews thought the Messiah's job was to be, Instead, they must come to believe that he has the power to defeat death, a feat only God has the power to do. So as they begin walking down that dusty road, he probably said something to them like, "I'm trying to tell you about everlasting life. There will be a time soon when you will no longer be able to see me. I know you don't want to think about that. But I'm trying to show you that there is living in the light of the resurrection. And when the day comes that you must witness my death and eventually witness your own death, experience your own death, you have nothing to fear in the light of the resurrection, because I am the resurrection and the life." So they continue walking with him towards Bethel. Mary and Martha hear Jesus' impending arrival, and by custom, he should first come to their home to pay his respects before going to the tomb to grieve for his friend Lazarus. Mary patiently waits at home for him, surrounded by other mourners. But Martha, I love Martha. Martha is so energized with anger that she rushes out to confront Jesus before he even gets to the village. Finding him, she forgets her place as a woman and lashes out at her powerful friend. And it's worse because she's done it in public. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." How many of us have said something similar to God? Like many of us, she then pleads with him to fix the situation. "Even now, I know God will give you whatever you ask of him." And calmly, Jesus assures her, "Martha, your brother will rise again." Repeating what she already believes, Martha proclaims, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection of the last day." That's what all Jews believed, that on the last day there would be a resurrection. And then something amazing, something extraordinary happens. He looks her straight in the eye and says, "Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, and even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe, Martha?" "Yes, Lord, I believe you're the Messiah." And then she makes the most astounding, radical profession of faith ever. She says, "I believe you are the Son of God." Martha is taking this monumental leap of faith with this proclamation. Before witnessing the resurrection of her brother, before witnessing Christ's resurrection, Martha's faith in the divinity of Jesus is crystallized in this moment of anger. I think Martha often gets a bum rap. After all, she's more often remembered for being that big sister that thinks Jesus should scold Mary for not helping her prepare dinner. But in today's lesson, Martha shows that her relationship with Jesus is so intimate that she feels quite comfortable approaching him, even in anger in public. She confronts him in front of the disciples, in front of the whole community. Yet his concern is not that she humiliated him in public or that she forgot her cultural norms. His distress is for her grief, for the grief of the community, and he weeps with them. What I love about Martha is her courage to be one of the first disciples to confess in public that Jesus is God, not a messenger of God. I think we often overlooked that how really incredibly bold she is. This one small statement is really not a small matter. In fact, if two Jewish men had testified in court that she said that Jesus of Nazareth was God, she could have been charged with blasphemy and the punishment for blasphemy for women is death by stoning. Martha must have been an admirable disciple as well to the community for whom John was writing his gospel. Like Martha, who was a believer before she witnessed the resurrection, John's community had to make their own leaps of faith without seeing the resurrection. And like Martha, they could be persecuted for proclaiming the divinity of Jesus. Actually, we too have a lot in common with John's community, do we not? We don't have the luxury of learning at the feet of the great rabbi. We didn't see his resurrection. We don't have hard physical evidence, no YouTube, no iPhone of the resurrection, and yet we still make leaps of faith. When life is going pretty well, it's kind of easy, really, to say, sure, I believe Jesus is God. But when is the last time you've had a really angry conversation with God? Many of us share Martha and Mary's feelings at one point or another in our lifetime. A loved one dies, so we slam the door in Jesus' face and grieve inconsolably. And in the darkness of night, we angrily cry out, Lord, if you had been there, this would not have happened. And in the midst of our mourning, in the midst of our raging, in the midst of pleading for release from our bondage, God's grace is there. I am the resurrection and the life, he tells us. Pain and angst will always be part of the human experience. And there will still be physical death for every single one of us. And yet there is grace. I am the resurrection and the life, Christ says to us. Although we can't touch Jesus, we can't hear him, we can't see him, his grace is with us always. And because of God's amazing grace, we can run in anger with our sister Martha to greet the Lord. And after acknowledging our rage over the things that are really, truly unfair and how hurtful we are, by the grace of God, we can fly into his waiting embrace of comfort. I am the resurrection and the life, he says. Sisters and brothers, the gift of hope waits us when we take that leap of faith. Jesus Christ defeated death for our sake. When we stumble in the darkness, when we cannot see him and still doubt, even when we are so furious that we turn our backs on him, Christ is gracious still and frees us to live life everlasting. Amen.